Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dial Global Virtual Summit. The time to take action is now. This panel is titled Racial Equity, Have We Really Moved the Dial? My name is Mark Lomas. I'm head of culture at Lloyds of London, and I'm joined by three other phenomenal leaders in this space who I'm delighted to welcome to the Dial Global Virtual stage. They are John Pettis, Vice President, Government Services, GN Resound, Anne Donahue, DEI Partner at Barclays, and Zephaniah Chukwudum, Business Manager, the CEO of Microsoft UK. So after the tragic murder of George Floyd over 2 years on, what has been achieved and how much further do we need to go? We'll be addressing that question today. And how critical is cultural competence within this? Cultural competence, in brief, is the ability to interact effectively with people from different cultures. This ability depends on awareness of your own cultural worldview, knowledge of other cultural practices and worldviews, tolerant attitudes towards cultural differences, and cross-cultural skills. The more different cultures and nationalities work together, the more cultural awareness, curiosity, and sensitivity are essential for teams to thrive. So today, we'll explore what programs have been implemented to create more diverse workforce and to encourage applicants from lower represented work groups. But before we go into detail, it would be great to learn a bit more about each of our esteemed panelists and why you are so passionate about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So if I could start with John, that would be great. Hi, John. Do you want to give us a quick intro to yourself? Oh, John may have frozen. In that case, we're going to move neatly along to Anne, and we'll come back. Anne, do you want to give us a little intro to yourself?
Very happy to. And Mark, can I just check you can hear me? Perfect, super. Thanks for the thumbs up. Hello, everybody. I'm really pleased to be part of today's panel session with John and with Zeph. I think we've got a really fantastic conversation coming up. As Mark said, I'm part of the Barclays Global Equity, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion team here. And at Barclays, our focus on DEI is about enabling our colleagues, customers, clients and communities to grow. I co-chair our Race at Work colleague task force, which is focused on driving meaningful progress on our Race at Work agenda from a colleague lens. In addition to our colleague focus, we also have two other pillars for Race at Work, our community pillar and our client and customer pillar. And throughout the conversation today, I'll talk about some of the initiatives that we have as part of that. For me, my passion in diversity, equity and inclusion is partnering with our business leaders globally across all regions and helping to drive a maturity of understanding on DEI across all of our agendas, and particularly the importance of intersectionality. And then it's about using that maturity of understanding and really translating that into making meaningful progress in DEI. That's me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Zeph, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll come back to John?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Checking that you can also hear me as well. I think you can. Yeah, fair. Yeah, pleasure to be here. So Zeph, work at Microsoft. I have done for the last decade or so across various different roles. And for me, probably there's something that comes along in the focus on diversity just by nature of being a Black man from South London. So that was interesting in a corporate environment. But then it probably took on a more intentional capacity. I've been the chair of what we call the Embrace Employee Resource Group for the last 2 years or so. And that's kind of given me focus. That used to be called the BAME group. So this kind of gave me this focus across, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, and what that means and how we drive meaningful change, how we tell the story around it, how we educate people, how we celebrate those stories, how we inspire people. And I think that's been like a two-way journey. I think there's been an exchange of value in it for others, of course, but also just for me as well. And I think I've always been an active learner on that journey. So really looking forward to the conversation here today.
Excellent, thank you. And John, over to you to introduce yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now? Excellent. My name is John Pettis. I'm a 10-year veteran of the United States Navy. I have 22 years of employment at GN Resound, and I hold the position of Vice President of Government Services for Resound. I'm also, I have the pleasure of being the founder and chairman of Black at GN, an employee resource group that we started here at Resound. As you mentioned earlier, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, civil unrest and police brutality was obviously a hot topic in the news, but being based here in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, it really hit home in our workplace here. And many asked the question, should we be doing more? And employee, resource groups are really a great opportunity for us to educate, the employees at our job. And we have 12 amazing change agents that stepped forward and volunteered their time to do something that I think is pretty amazing. But we're only in our infancy stage. It's only 2 years. So I look forward to sharing some of our experiences and also to hear some of the dialogue and have some real conversation with the panelists today. I just want to say that I'm glad to be here and thank Dow Global for the invitation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is going to be a great conversation. So first, I'll turn to you, Anne. What programs have been implemented to create a more diverse workforce and to encourage applicants from groups that aren't as well represented within the Barclays workforce?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll talk to our own journey from a Barclays perspective in this space, including the approach that we took to setting ambitions, what underpins our progress, as well as some of the initiatives that we have from a colleague's perspective, as well as some of the external partnerships that we have. So in terms of our own journey, we were one of the first signatories of the UK's Race at Work Charter. We've voluntarily disclosed our ethnicity pay gaps since 2019. And in order to have further transparency, we've published separate ethnicity pay gaps for colleagues who identify as Asian, Black, and multiracial in the UK. We stood up our Race at Work colleague task force in summer 2020, and we published our action plan in October of that year. And then in 2021, we set up our Race at Work ambitions. And I'll talk about our ambitions, and then I'll call out some of the programs from an internal perspective, as well as some of our external partnerships piece. So we talk about ambitions, and the reason we talk about ambitions is the kind of oft-quoted phrase of what gets measured gets done. We use the language of ambitions rather than targets, and this was about having a clear direction of travel rather than a final destination. And for our Race at Work ambitions, it was about recognizing that some ethnicities are underrepresented relative to the potential talent pools that we have available in our regional marketplaces. So our Race at Work ambitions were setting out measurable outcomes, which we could use to assess our progress that we were making to close that representation gap. The regional piece is important. We have 3 ambitions. From a UK perspective, we're aiming to increase the number of underrepresented minority employees by 25% by the end of 2025. We have a US specific one, which is looking for an increase of 20%, again, by the end of 2025. And then we had a more near-term ambition that was focused on senior leaders within the organization, and that is about recognizing the importance of role models. So across the UK and the US, our aim was to at least double the number of Black employees that we had at managing director level by the end of 2022, by the end of this year. And these 3 ambitions, both near-term and long-term, both regional and senior, gave us measurable outcomes grounded by metrics and milestones that help us to hold ourselves to account. We monitor progress against these ambitions also with a gender diversity in mind, recognizing the importance of intersectionality. We have an ethnicity dashboard that looks at hiring, retention, and promotion. That's shared monthly with our senior leaders and our Race at Work champions, and we use that to monitor progress. So that's our ambitions. And then when we were setting out our plan, there was a couple of key things that underpins the plan that we thought was really critical in order to actually make sure our plan was successful. One is business accountability. We have Race at Work champions in each of our different business areas and functions, and they are empowered to hold their business accountable to delivering their Race at Work action plans for their business area. Data-led insights is also really key for us. We have an annual employee opinion survey, And we ask diverse characteristic questions as part of that across all aspects of diversity, including race and ethnicity. And that helps us pick out specific engagement insights and trends from Black and ethnically diverse colleagues, but also by looking at it across all of our 6 agendas, again, we can take that intersectional lens. Partnership with our ERGs was key. We have got 12 ERGs, and in terms of alignment to race at work, we have an Asian Professionals Resource Group, which is based in the UK and the US, a Latin Professionals Resource Group based in the US, Black Professional Resource Group, UK and US, and a multicultural resource group as well. And our ERGs played a really key part in us, both in terms of shaping the plan to begin with, but also in terms of holding us accountable for really delivering that plan. And I'm sure John and Zeph will talk much more to the journey of ERGs and the really positive impact they can have in the organisation. I'll touch a little bit about the colleague piece first and some of the actions that we're taking as part of that in order to help us achieve our ambitions. Like most organisations, we are absolutely focused on hiring. So how do we increase underrepresented minority candidates into the organisation? But as well as hiring people into the organisation, it's really also about focusing the fantastic diverse talent that we already have in place in the organisation. So how do we make sure that that pipeline of diverse talent is really getting access to career and development opportunities and have the opportunity to really progress their career within the organisation? We've got a number of different initiatives around that, including our diverse accelerator programs. We run that with both an ethnicity lens and a gender lens. But again, all participants to our programs are encouraged to bring their whole selves to that program. So again, that intersectional lens is really key to us. Allyship is really key as well. And I know we're going to touch on that later, so I'll kind of hold on that for now. And then it was about being transparent and measuring our outcomes through our ambitions and through our ethnicity dashboard to see if we're making progress over time. From an external perspective, there's a couple of things I'll just touch on. One is about supporting diverse founders. So we have a Black Business Founder Program accelerator, which was created with Eagle Labs, which is our network we have within the UK to help early stage digital and tech businesses. And that's our Black Founder Accelerator is targeted for companies with 1 or more Black entrepreneurs in the UK. And the aim is boosting diversity in entrepreneurship. That's done in partnership with FounderVine, which is an award-winning social enterprise specializing in supporting and championing underrepresented founders and communities. We've also just recently announced a 5 million investment in Latitude Ventures, so LatVC, which is a US institutional venture firm investing in Latino entrepreneurs, which again is a fast-growing part of the US economy. And then the final thing I'll just touch on is around supplier diversity. So we have a global head of supplier diversity, Harvey Butler, who works across business areas to increase the use of diverse suppliers. When we talk about diverse suppliers, we talk both in terms of size, but also diversity of ownership. And in terms of that diversity of ownership, it's looking at businesses who are majority owned by underrepresented communities. So women, people of color, LGBT+, veterans, people with disabilities, again, that intersectional lens, and looking at those potential diverse suppliers and getting them in front of the business, in front of decision makers. Specifically for race at work, we have made a commitment to double our spend with Black-owned businesses by 2025. So in summary, I think it's about knowing where you want to get to, which for us was setting our ambitions, knowing what will enable progress. So again, for us, that was around business accountability, data-led insights, and partnerships with our ERGs, and then having those tangible initiatives that you can roll out both from a colleague perspective and also around the external piece as well. So I'll pause there and give John and Zeph a chance to jump in, but that's some of the things that we've been focused on.
Excellent, thank you. Some impressive stuff there. John, I'll turn to you for a comment, and then Zeph.
It is just a pleasure to hear a mature organization that's obviously been around, longer. We're more of a grassroots, just getting started. So this is music to my ears hearing this. For us, we started out with implementing ERGs, which we didn't have 2 years ago. So right now we have, obviously following our driver side of audio, the Women's Network, then there was Black at GN, and then we have Pride at GN, and we're looking to actually continue more. one of the things when I recall a dialogue I had with my North American head, Scott Davis, the summer of 2020, I received a phone call, and I'll take you on a little quick journey. I've seen this cycle before around election periods, to where there's excitement in the media and there's a need to try to calm down the masses. And when I received a phone call to say, hey, as a Black leader in the organization, would you be willing to step forward and actually, support, an ERG group? Admittedly, I really didn't have much interest, because I had seen it happen before. There was issues that are happening, and then after election cycle's over with, you don't get the energy that you have. But that conversation was different. And this is a person who has the experience and done it at a previous job that they worked at, and he did a really good job of convincing me that this was worth the effort. And what I was interested in is just starting with the foundation, building the building blocks to get started. And I thought that could be the building blocks that could be used in future ERGs that we implement in the United States. And one of them was, establishing the pillars, and it was recruitment pillar, retention pillar, and affiliation. That's where we started. And we solicited the change agents that I mentioned earlier, and we ended up with people out of that group that became the pillar leads. And the recruitment strategy that we had, we knew that, that's a hard one, because the longest journey is trying to get students from universities. Well, that takes a long time. But we wanted to get started. There were, people at wanting communication on what we were doing. So we sought after, Black historic, colleges and universities. I work for a hearing aid manufacturer, so we were looking at the audiology departments, but eventually wanting to broaden that into other disciplines, business, engineering, finance, et cetera. But we started off, that was a hard one, seeking out, HBCUs that have audiology programs. We found out, well, that's a minority in itself. But we landed on Hampton University, and we liaised with them. We looked for jobs for opportunities. We also offered scholarships that were offered to audiologists there, and I'm happy to say that a year after we introduced the ERG, we were able to award 2 scholarships to audiology students there. And we want to go further and make that not just from giving a scholarship. We wanted to create a path from student to entrepreneurship, or possibly coming into the audiology field. So we work with University of Pacific, so we can go from undergrad to grad. We also worked under our affiliation group. We, have retail ownership. We were looking at how many minority owners do we have under that particular pillar that will be interested in bringing in students after they finish their job to have their first employment, and then potentially having them wean and be trained, and potentially have an opportunity to take over that business or go into business for themselves. So from student to entrepreneurship, I thought that was really good, so they could help give back. When we looked at how also under recruitment, obviously we looked at, talent conferences. We looked at recruitment firms. Obviously we talked about scholarship for African American minorities. Those are ones that we're in the infancy stages, but we got started. Retention, that's another, internally, we have talent right here that was wondering, how do I, move through the organization, and education was key there. Training, your internal managers, how do we go, to deal with a culturally diverse workforce. We're in the infancy stages of that, but our talent review and making sure we go from appointments to making sure people get opportunities to interview. Mentorship programs, we're in the process of implementing that. Development, making sure everybody understands that it is your responsibility to bring it to your supervisors and managers, to let them know what your expectations are, your ambitions are. And then leadership meetings, making sure we educate and communicate effectively. So I'm happy to say that after 2 years, we've implemented quite a bit in getting started, and I'm very proud of the team. But there's so much more work to be done in these particular areas. You touched on a point, and it's actually one of the things that I want to touch on in my topic. It's the next phase that we have. We've done the introduction, we've done the scholarships, we've done the holidays, and we've done all those types of things as far as providing resources to the organization for where they can get wellness benefits or financial support. But now it's time for us for the rubber to meet the road and start identifying some key metrics that we need to follow as an organization. And I think that's the natural next step. I won't steal thunder for a later conversation, but that's the direction that I want to go. I'm very interested in the dialogue of how you got started in that.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll certainly pick that up a little later. And Zeph, what are the biggest issues and obstacles you've had to overcome to ensure everyone feels included and belongs along this journey?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I would say, that last question, I think it's great to see some of the things that are happening. I'll say for people that are listening, I think there's two things that stood out for me actually, like this delineation of like what the business. I love how Anne articulated what Barclays is doing as a business and a corporation and their investments, and then an ERG, and not to conflate those two things. And like if you're listening in, your ERG is not these are employees. That's not the vehicle to go and do your business things. I think there should be there should be a delineation between it. And then also I would say if you're listening, and some of the things that are going on, 5 million hair, this hair, if you're listening, not everyone's got the power, the resources for Barclays or Microsoft or RE Salmon, but I always think it's what's meaningful, and meaningful could just be time, or it could just be a space or a place or a resource. One of the things that we did at Microsoft was we run a mentoring program with about 300 external people each day, and someone from Microsoft gives up time, and I think that's super impactful. And sometimes it's led to jobs and opportunities, but sometimes it just leads to confidence, and that's meaningful. But then to your question, Mark, just about obstacles that I faced, I think there's probably two ways you talk about. I think there's like a personal thing, especially when you're being from a person from a diverse or ethnic background. It could be any kind of thing that's in your mind, if I think about from an ethnicity point of view. And then there's the business point of view. The other day, it was beginning of September, my son, he's 4, so he started reception. He's gone from nursery, he's graduated to reception. And I remember on the first day, took him up to the school gates, and he was excited, which is great. And there were all these little kids around. And so I just remember that first day feeling. I think sometimes maybe the parents can feel more nervous than the young ones. And it made me reflect on my first day walking into like Microsoft, right? And for him, I think he looks around and sees people like him, or just sees young kids, they're all thing. And I think for me, it kind of made me think about when I walked in, that first day feeling, no matter where you are, right? You could just you've just got the new CEO gig, or you could be, you walk in, there's that feeling of being there on the first day. And then you kind of think, where's my safe spots? Or who can I maybe have a conversation that I'll be comfortable with? And these are the kind of things that when I walked into a corporate environment, 10, 11 years ago, I didn't find those kind of things that maybe would have been those anchors that I could have just been like, oh, that person looks like me, or is from my area, or is maybe my age or something like that. So it was all these kind of things were in my head. And so that first day feeling and that feeling, I think later always talks about belonging and how do you feel welcome. And sometimes when you have that lens and you look around and you see people that look like you, or behave like you, or talk like you, whatever, you can automatically kind of get that feeling of belonging. So one, I think that is also a personal thing, but it's also something that your organization has to like, how does our organization represent where we are? I think it was Anne that talked about regions, like the regions that we're in, like how do we represent where we serve? And so I think for me personally, it was just overcoming that obstacle of where I was from, what I looked like, what people were viewing me as. The first thing that they say was, oh, because I'm quite tall as well, like there's a tall black guy. They sent this tall black guy to talk about my business, and and I used to have that in my head a lot, and I had to deal with that, and then you get what I say, you get these mentors or these coaches or these sponsors, or you get these wins, I would say, where you start to really believe that you're there for a reason, like you're not a token part of something, like you're there because you're competent and you're capable. And so over time, I became like, I'm here because I can deliver, and so I got out of that headspace and I was able to overcome that that obstacle that was kind of in my head. So I'd say that there's that personal obstacle, and then I think there's just the obstacle of how we're creating spaces and places and environments that look like the regions and the places that we represent, no matter whether it's black, white. I think the last panel was talking about accessibility. That same feeling can come from someone who's not, who has a disability that comes into an environment. So that's probably one of the things that I think I would just share and answer your question, Mark, conscious of time. I think we could talk about these things for ages.
Yeah, so wonderful. Thank you for that. I'm going to come to John, and then I'm going to put in a couple of questions that we've got coming through the chat. So, John, you talked a little bit about having change agents, and from your kind of perspective, what kind of actions do you need to take to create high-performing teams, taking into account kind of different cultures and nationalities?
You know, I used to think it was solely communication. Not getting a message out is really dangerous, because they say the idle mind is the devil's workshop. Zephaniah, you hit a key point. In the communication piece, I was addressing the fact that let's go out and talk about what we're doing and make sure everybody's educated on that. And I felt that was important through town halls and through website updates, activity updates, holiday announcements, education pieces, celebrating employees, job postings, things of that nature. And creating that environment and letting people know where you can go to get that sense of belonging and have that welcoming and seeing faces like you. But now that we've accomplished that, I've moved a step further to where, and I had mentioned it before, and I wanted to point out the fact that key DEI metrics are extremely important. We as a business, we know the impact of a diverse workforce and the impact on the gross domestic product. Published, everybody knows that. But in any business, we measure to what we perform. We measure to what we perform. We hear the phrase where you say you perform to what you measure. I hear it every day. Any meeting that I have with my boss, we have our KPIs we put in front of us, and I just feel that, now the next time is getting to that step where we're talking about a scorecard of things. And I'm thinking about things like, demographics across organizational levels is one. That seems important to me. Retention across employee groups, that seems important to me. Employee turnover, very important. Are we seeing turnover in a specific group more so than other spaces? Candidate demographics. Are we, looking at the candidates that we're bringing in? I love hearing that you have targets for 2025 where you're setting percentages, where you're going after certain protected groups. And then I look at the adverse impact or the hiring stats of protected, groups. Is there a need? Do we celebrate when we've hit certain things? And I think celebration is key. And are we just not even on the radar for other things? So I appreciate the question. Like I said, it's one that I see that it's our next step. I'd love to continue this discussion by kicking off and hearing from both Zephaniah and on, what they've adopted. And I'm not ashamed to say I'm willing to steal shamelessly. So there you go.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And it sounds like you're doing some great tracking of progress. How do you, because obviously when you track progress and you put effort into these things, let's face it, not everyone is happy about that. So how do you communicate that success and sort of allow space for the dissenters if there are any?
Yeah, look, I think with all of these things, it's toned from the top, right? D&I is not owned by a group D&I team. D&I is owned by the CEO. It's owned by the exec committee within the organization. And so that tone from that top, the ownership from the top, and just being really clear around what the expectation is really important. And then it's about making sure that if you've put an ambition in place or you've put a target in place, that you've got the initiatives there to help support the business to get there. Ours are 2025, and we've done that because we want to look at this long term. So you need to have your initiatives that will build that long term. So John, I loved your example about HBCUs. We've similarly got some partnerships with HBCUs. You're building a long-term talent pipeline of that, getting people into the business and helping them grow and helping them progress. So I think just having that long-term piece, having the initiatives in place that can back up what you think you're going after or what you want, what you're aspiring to go after, and making sure that's there. So if I'm the line manager and I'm now being held to account for this, I've got a suite of things ready to turn to do, whether that's how I'm hiring, whether that's in terms of development programs that I can nominate for, whether that's in terms of I'm going through my promotion lists for the year. So I think that particular piece is really important. I would keep emphasizing the intersectional piece, because I think, Mark, to your point about kind of dissent, it isn't this piece around, Layla said that in the kind of the VC piece that opens before this, it isn't a zero-sum game. If one group, gets ahead, it does not mean that another group does not get ahead. So that intersectional piece is so important. And for a lot of organizations right now, the metrics are there in terms of race and ethnicity, the metrics are there in terms of gender, and then other organizations are getting much more mature around what else they're looking to capture. And I think getting an organization to understand that representation, understand relative to their markets in terms of where they are, and how do you start to close the gap? Because if you're only hiring from half the workforce that's out there externally, you're not hiring the best people. It's as simple as that. So kind of framing it in that commercial context, but really having the right initiatives in place. So from a line manager perspective, I know what I need to do to start to get this right, rather than you've given me something, but you haven't helped me how to get there.
Yeah, excellent points. I think from my point of view, in my experience, you're absolutely right. You need the data, you need the insights, and people need to understand what they can actively do to move things forward, and do that and take individual accountability for that too seems very important. So Zeph, turning to Microsoft, how do you engage with the people around you on issues like this, particularly those who might feel that progress is a bit too slow? And I think we're probably all familiar with that challenge. How do you balance those conversations between making steady progress and maybe others who want to see a faster rate of change?
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things. It's like just think about basic change management in any scenario, and people change, because you've got folks that want it to speed up, and then you've got folks that are, hey, you got to slow down. This is a bit too much. It's a bit scary. I don't really understand. It all feels a bit too much. It's October. It's Black History Month. Some people are, again, we've been doing this. Why do we do this each year? And so for me, and I'll talk about it from an ERG perspective. When I took on the chair of the lead in the ERG, we had about 30 odd members in our group. If I take a UK population in Microsoft UK, and it's about 2,500 people. Today we're about 550 odd in terms of membership. And the way that I thought about it is that typically when people talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of it is around, they feel like it's educational, they feel like they're being preached to or said something's gone wrong, so you need to fix it. And for me, when I thought about Black culture and being Black and being from London, I would always think about amazing, beautiful things like the food from Black culture or the music. I would think about the figures that inspired me. I would think about when I had the opportunity to travel to Nigeria with my mom or with my family. And so I put down principles, these three things in our ERG that says, whenever you do something, there's three things that I want us to think about. I want us to think about inspiring, celebrating, and educating. I want us to do all of those three things in generally throughout the course of a period. Are we educated? Of course, with Black History Month, we're going to educate, we're going to talk about stuff. But also, I want us to celebrate. I want people to go, wow, that's an amazing culture. I want them to feel like, man, it must be amazing being involved in, it must be amazing to be Black or be involved in Black culture. I want them to know that there's inspirational figures. We watch people like, when we look at the England football team, we see players like Bukayo Saka, or we see Ian Wright commentating on TV, and people are like, wow, these are amazing role models. That we saw what Marcus Rashford did during the lockdown with young people, that these are amazing people. So I want us to tell those stories. So to me, there's always going to be people that aren't going to come on the journey. That's just life. Whatever thing you're going to do. But I think it's like, how do we tell the stories in different ways, and how do we give people the data? How do we give them inspirational people to look at? How do we educate them? How do we get them to be excited about these these things. And for me, that's always been the way that we've approached bringing people on the journey. And we've approached saying to people, the reason why we're going super fast is because of this historical background and this historical context. The reason why we're pushing this initiative is because of that story. And I think that's like with anything, like, you know, some people, I think a lot in our organization, no one has, one of my mentors, like, you assume positive intent. I don't think anyone really has this really like, I don't want to do that, because it's like, mostly it's like a case of like, I don't understand. So I hope that, yeah, that's the way that we think about it. And I think we've seen some really strong progress and really strong building up of allies along that journey as we've gone on that journey, both from a senior leadership all the way through the organization.
That's great to hear. One of the things that I'll turn to John and maybe ask you this question, I think. One of the things that often comes up is certainly after the tragic murder of George Floyd, there was a huge sort of range of activity from organizations all over the globe with commitments, et cetera, et cetera. How 2 years on from that, do you still feel there's that same broad consensus behind and momentum behind racial equality? Or do you think that's subsided in some areas? Obviously not for your organizations, because you're all doing really good work. But do you feel that momentum is still there, or do you believe it's waning slightly?
I think we have an opportunity for a resurgence, but if I'm being completely honest, I would say yes. You know, in the beginning, it was everyone was proactively wanting to get involved. And I remember I started this by saying, you know, once the election cycle is over with and the media is not throwing fire on it every day, it starts to win. And that was the history of the cycle. I've been a 22-year employee, so I've seen it every 4 years here. I've seen it come and go, come and go, come and go. The difference this time is we put some structure to it, to where now we can hold on. And we'll be more prepared for the next cycles that happen because we have things in place. It's interesting, you know, these are some of the things that we have to do the good work, right? Zeph, you hit right at my wheelhouse, because we're at the point now to where communication was key. And then when we, beyond that, I remember our first town hall meeting. You know, I can recall the anxiety around, you know, people wanting to know, what is Black Aegean up to? But I can say that, you know, we had so many people coming at that time point wanting to lend support. So it was important for us to identify those change agents and set the expectations. And as guys, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And it was very clear in the communication that the things that we're volunteering to do right now may not benefit us ourselves in our tenure with Resound. We're planting seeds for the future. And that was captured in our vision, and that was captured in our mission. So those are very important parts for us to know, that this is a long game, not a sprint. And then there were other things, you know, challenges we had to deal with. You know, if I go to the dark side, and now we're going to get into some real conversations. I remember being asked multiple times about how they can help. But I also recall that I was approached by a white male, and it was a comment that was provided, and he asked if he should start his own ERG, you know, for his people. Now, how do you respond to that? Right? Now, a lot of the inquiries that we had was around membership to Black Aegean, and I'm a golfer. I try to be a golfer, think about this. I mean, Tiger Woods in our lifetime was denied access to certain golf courses because of the color of his skin. Think about that. One of the greatest golfers we've seen of all time in our lifetime. So I had to make sure, and when you look at the word membership as it applies to golf, you know, and you look at the history of membership when it applies to golf, it's status, it's exclusive, exclusionary rather, not inclusive. It's the opposite of what I wanted. And I realized in the quest to educate that I needed to make sure that identifying what membership means to Black Aegean had to be completely inclusive and welcoming. And we put together tiers for that. We don't use the term membership. You can access our website and express your interest and want support. Someone from our communication affiliation pillar will reach out to you. They will educate you on what the ERG is about, and they will say, and they will ask you based on your interests. If you want just general information to be provided to you, then you can come to the town halls and get that, or you can go to the website. If you want to be more involved, you can be a part of one of the pillars, and we'll direct you to one of those leaders. And then from that, the good work is evaluated, prioritized, and that's how we introduce things. So I know it's a long way of going around, but it's saying, no, we don't have the same level, but we have the right people involved to move the marathon on. And like Zeph, I keep going back to you because that was inspiring, because the next step for us, we have the calendar to where we have Black History Month, we have Juneteenth, we have, Kwanzaa, all those types. That's our pillars on our calendars that we have. We have the scholarship that goes through. The milestones on our calendar. But I'm inspired by Inspire, Celebrate, and definitely the next ones you have for Educate. That's where we bring those other pieces in to keep that work going. So long way of saying there's work to be done. And I think we're still on the right path, but we don't have the same level of engagement as we did in the wake of George Floyd's murder.
Excellent. Fantastic thoughts from each of you. Zeph and Anne, we've got about a minute for each of you to give a final thought or top tip in 30 seconds, and then I'll wrap up. So Anne, first to you. If there's one top tip you'd give people to keep this momentum going, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to be cheeky and do two, and then I'll try and speak really fast with an Irish accent and see how it goes. I think one is kind of to Zeph's point, right? You can have bigger organizations that can throw around numbers that look very impressive, and that's fantastic. But every single organization has suppliers. So look at your supplier base, look at the diversity of your supplier base, and if it is not diverse and doesn't represent the region or the country that you're in, see what you can do about that. Start small, start with 1, start with 2, start with 5, start with 10. So look at your supplier base, because that wealth generation back into the community is super, super important. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece, and I think this has been a really nice panel in terms of the different perspectives, and Zeph, you sort of alluded to this earlier on, there is a partnership between the ERGs and the work that the ERGs do, and that the work that the business needs to do. And do not get your ERGs to do the work that the business should be doing, because there is work that they should be doing in themselves. So that partnership is key, but there is a difference in that responsibility, and the business needs to make sure that they are owning the business part of it.
Excellent. Wonderfully said. Zeph, final thought from you, top tip on keeping the momentum going, and then I'll wrap up because we've got about 40 seconds left.
Yeah, I think for me, the top tip is just to stay really curious about things. That's one thing I've really learned, especially we talk about, I ran the BAME network, but corporate's Black, Asian, and there's different elements, and minority ethnics are different. So I had to really just adopt a posture of curiosity. And then you pair curiosity with bravery. And I think, not coming from a place of like, I'm really trying to understand, and being brave to ask those questions that you might have felt uncomfortable. Because, most of the time, the person on the other side would appreciate that. So I'd say pair curiosity with bravery. And then for all the D&I leaders and overall leading, I would say outcome is to give grace, because I always think that people are going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes. Anyone will make mistakes. And then we just allow people, if they're curious, you can make a mistake, and we offer some grace to it. So curiosity, bravery, and offering grace.
What a wonderful thought to wrap up on. So thanks to the panel, wonderful conversation. Don't forget, everyone, to tag Dial Global and use your social media handle on Moving the Dial. And please do join us after this short break to hear from another incredible panel exploring the impact of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity on global companies. So thank you again to the panel. Absolutely wonderful job. Fantastic conversation.